There is a moment when people begin to realize they no longer have the same access to you. It rarely begins with an argument. You do not announce it. You do not threaten to leave. You do not explain yourself one last time. You simply stop reacting in the way they expect. The message arrives, and you do not answer immediately. The provocation comes, and you do not defend yourself. Someone becomes distant to make you anxious, and instead of chasing them, you allow the distance to remain. Someone misunderstands you, and for once, you resist the urge to spend 20 minutes explaining who you really are. Nothing dramatic happens on the surface, but psychologically, something enormous has changed. Because people do not only become accustomed to your presence, they become accustomed to your reactions. They learn what makes you anxious, what makes you explain yourself, what makes you feel guilty, what makes you rush to repair tension, what makes you say yes when you want to say no, what makes you return after being disrespected. And without anyone consciously planning it, relationships begin organizing themselves around those reactions. You become predictable. Then one day, you stop. And that is when you discover something about the people around you. But more importantly, you discover something about yourself. Because the hardest part of becoming less reactive is not dealing with other people's discomfort. It is surviving your own. The silence after you decide not to explain yourself. The guilt after you say no. The anxiety after you stop chasing. The fear that someone will leave because you finally stopped doing everything necessary to make them stay. That is where this becomes psychological. Because the person who constantly reacts is not always reacting because the situation demands it. Sometimes they are reacting because an old wound demands it. And Carl Jung's psychology gives us a powerful way to understand why. You may believe that when you answer immediately, apologize excessively, defend yourself, rescue someone, or keep a dying relationship alive, you are simply making conscious decisions. But beneath those decisions may be something far older. A fear of rejection, a need for approval, a persona built around being helpful, a shadow filled with anger you were never allowed to express, a complex organized around abandonment. And when another person touches one of those psychological structures, your reaction can feel almost automatic. They press the right button. You move. That is the real problem. Not that people can provoke you. Everyone can be provoked. The problem begins when your reactions become so predictable that other people's behavior can determine your internal state. They withdraw. You become anxious. They criticize. You defend. They become disappointed. You feel guilty. They become angry. You abandon your boundary. They ignore you. You chase. At that point, who is deciding what happens inside you? This video is not about becoming cold. It is not about disappearing to make someone miss you. It is not about using silence as punishment. And it is certainly not about pretending you do not care. Pretending not to care is still a reaction. This is about something much more difficult. Becoming conscious of the part of you that feels compelled to react. Because when you can see that part clearly, you can finally begin deciding whether it should control your next move. If this kind of exploration helps you see your inner life more clearly, subscribe to The Kingdom Within. Because what we are looking at today is not a trick for controlling other people. It is the opposite. It is how you stop handing other people control over you. And to understand how that happens, we need to look at a role many people learn very early in life. The role of the person who keeps everything together. Maybe this was you. You learned to read the room before you learned to read yourself. You noticed when someone was angry. You noticed when someone was disappointed. You noticed changes in tone, silence, facial expressions, distance. You became sensitive to emotional weather, and perhaps that sensitivity helped you. If the adults around you were unpredictable, knowing what mood they were in mattered. If love felt conditional, approval mattered. If conflict felt dangerous, keeping peace mattered. So you adapted. You became helpful, easy, understanding, responsible, available. You learned when to stay quiet, when to apologize, when to give in, when to make yourself smaller. Maybe people praised you for it. You are so mature. You never cause problems. You are always there for everyone. And because those qualities were rewarded, they became part of your identity. This is where Jung's concept of the persona becomes useful. The persona is the social face through which we meet the world. It is necessary. We all develop roles that help us function within families, workplaces, friendships, and society. But the persona becomes dangerous when you forget that it is only one part of you. Suppose your persona becomes, I am the one who never creates conflict. Now what happens to anger? It cannot fit. I am the one everyone can depend on. What happens to exhaustion? It becomes shameful. I am understanding. What happens when you genuinely do not want to understand someone anymore? You suppress the feeling. I am kind. What happens when you need to say no? No begins to feel cruel. This is how a virtue can slowly become a prison. Not because kindness is wrong, not because generosity is weakness, but because any identity becomes dangerous when you are psychologically forbidden from expressing its opposite. Then something fascinating happens. The rejected opposite does not disappear. It goes underground. You continue saying yes, but resentment grows. You continue being available, but privately you feel drained. You keep forgiving, but somewhere beneath the forgiveness lives anger. You smile. You help. You listen. And later, alone, you wonder why you feel so empty. You may even resent people for taking what you repeatedly offer them. This is one of the cruelest psychological loops. You give because you fear rejection. Then you become resentful because others accept what you give. But because anger contradicts your persona, you cannot acknowledge the resentment directly. So you give again, and the cycle continues, until something breaks. Maybe you explode over something small, a message, a request, a comment that normally would not matter. Everyone is surprised. Perhaps you are surprised too. Why did I react like that? Because the reaction did not begin in that moment. That moment was simply where accumulated psychic material finally found an exit. Jung's idea of the shadow helps us understand this. Everything you exclude from your conscious identity can become part of the shadow. And for people whose persona is built around being endlessly accommodating, the shadow may contain qualities they desperately need. Anger, assertiveness, self-interest, the ability to disappoint someone, the ability to walk away, the ability to say, that is not my responsibility, the ability to let another adult experience the consequences of their own choices. Think about that. What if part of what you call darkness is actually your unused capacity to protect yourself? What if the anger you are ashamed of contains a boundary? What if the selfishness you fear contains the ability to consider your own needs? What if your desire to withdraw is not proof that you are becoming cold? What if you are simply exhausted from performing constant availability? This is why real self-knowledge is rarely comfortable. Because it forces you to reconsider qualities you were taught to divide into good and bad. Always available, good. Unavailable, bad. Always understanding, good. Refusing to engage, bad. Always forgiving, good. Walking away, bad. But the psyche does not become whole through one-sidedness. There are moments when availability is love, and moments when availability is self-abandonment. There are moments when silence is avoidance, and moments when silence is restraint. There are moments when forgiveness is healing, and moments when repeated forgiveness becomes permission for a pattern to continue. Context matters. Consciousness matters. And this is exactly what constant reactivity removes. When you are triggered, you lose context. You respond to the emotional urgency. Someone is upset with you. Someone has not replied. Someone misinterpreted you. Correct them immediately. Someone threatens distance. The impulse says, do something so this uncomfortable feeling will stop. And that is the hidden mechanism. Often you are not responding to the other person. You are responding to your inability to tolerate what their behavior activates inside you. That distinction changes everything. Take the need to explain yourself. Someone says, "You've changed." Immediately you want to respond. No, that's not what happened. Let me explain. Sometimes clarification is useful, but sometimes the urgency has nothing to do with clarity. The urgency comes from the fact that someone now holds an image of you that you cannot control, and that feels unbearable. Until hopefully they return to the version of you that feels safe. But notice what happened. Their perception became more important than your peace. Your nervous system could not tolerate being misunderstood. Now imagine doing something different. You know your intention. The other person has chosen a different interpretation. And instead of forcing agreement, not because their interpretation is correct, because you no longer need to enter every courtroom in which someone has decided to put you on trial. At first, this feels almost physically uncomfortable. The mind begins producing arguments. You should say something. They'll think you're guilty. They'll tell other people. They need to know the truth. Maybe you should respond. Sometimes silence is not appropriate. But before responding, ask, am I choosing to speak, or am I being compelled to speak? That one question can expose the entire pattern. Choice feels different from compulsion. Compulsion demands immediate relief. Choice can tolerate uncertainty. Compulsion says, choice asks what outcome is actually possible. Compulsion imagines that if you say the perfect sentence, you can control someone else's interpretation. And most of us waste enormous amounts of energy attempting exactly that. Rehearsing conversations, explaining things to people who have already decided what they want to believe, arguing internally with someone who is not even in the room. Hours can disappear this way. The other person may be sleeping peacefully. You are still having the argument. This is where the idea of psychic energy becomes important. Jung used the concept of libido in a broader psychological sense than Freud, treating it as psychic energy rather than reducing it only to sexuality. Where attention goes, energy goes. What you repeatedly invest in becomes psychologically charged. A person can leave your physical life but continue occupying enormous psychic space. You keep replaying what they said, what you should have said, what they might be thinking, whether they are watching. They are absent physically, but psychologically, they are still receiving your energy every day. This is why withdrawal is not primarily about disappearing from other people. It is about withdrawing energy from patterns that no longer deserve to organize your inner life. That may mean fewer messages, but it can also mean something far deeper. No longer arguing with them in your imagination. No longer checking whether they noticed your absence. No longer performing your healing for an audience. no longer making choices around how they might react. Because if you disappear in order to make someone chase you, you have not withdrawn psychologically. You are still completely organized around them. Your absence is simply another strategy for obtaining their attention. That is attachment wearing the costume of power. Real withdrawal is quieter. It does not ask, "Will they miss me?" It asks, "Who am I when I stop arranging myself around their reaction?" And that question can expose something you may not expect. You may discover you do not know. Because perhaps you have spent years positioning yourself in relation to other people, keeping them comfortable, avoiding their disappointment, anticipating their needs, managing how they see you, and where there was constant activity. At first, that silence may not feel peaceful, because reactivity gives you something, a relationship to repair. And when the crisis disappears, you are left with yourself. For some people, that is the most uncomfortable part of all. This is why they create another crisis, reopen the conversation, anything to escape the silence. But if you can stay there, if you can resist filling the space immediately, something begins to happen. You start hearing what was underneath all the noise, the anger you never acknowledged, the exhaustion you normalized, the loneliness you kept hiding beneath constant availability, the desire you postponed, the life you kept saying you would return to when everyone else finally stopped needing you. And then you encounter a disturbing possibility. Maybe the people around you were not the only ones keeping you trapped in the role. But recognizing the pattern is only the beginning. The next step is learning what happens inside you when you no longer use another person's reaction to regulate your own emotional state. Now you are much closer to the real wound. Because the urge to send another message was never only about the message. It was about preventing a deeper belief from becoming emotionally activated. This is why withdrawal can feel unbearable even when the relationship itself is clearly unhealthy. The relationship may be keeping an identity alive. As long as you are chasing, you do not have to confront the possibility that being chosen by someone else has become proof of your worth. As long as you are rescuing, you do not have to ask what you need. As long as you are managing their emotions, you do not have to listen to your own. As long as you are arguing, you do not have to accept that some people will never understand you. Reactivity keeps you busy, and busyness can become a defense against self-confrontation. This is why becoming less reactive can initially create more anxiety, not less. The old coping mechanism is being removed, but the fear beneath it is still alive. Those feelings do not necessarily mean you are making the wrong choice. They may mean you have finally stopped anesthetizing the deeper conflict. And this is where the shadow enters again. Because the version of you that has spent years being agreeable may carry a shadow filled with everything that was forbidden. I want something different. These statements may feel shocking to a person whose identity was built around accommodation. But the psyche eventually demands balance. If one side of the personality is overdeveloped, the opposite side accumulates pressure. And when the pressure becomes strong enough, it finds a way out, sometimes through sudden rage, sometimes through burnout, sometimes through disappearing without explanation, sometimes through attraction to people who embody everything you do not allow yourself to become. This is a classic shadow dynamic. Imagine someone who has built their entire identity around being responsible and self-controlled. Then they become fascinated by a reckless person. Maybe because the reckless person carries projected qualities that the responsible one has buried. The attraction can feel magnetic, but underneath it may be compensation, a one-sided psyche reaching for its opposite. This is one reason some relationships feel powerful and destabilizing at the same time. They activate unlived parts of us. the other person becomes a doorway. And if we do not recognize the projection, we confuse the doorway with the destination. We think, but perhaps part of what we need is the quality we see through them. Their refusal to please everyone. Their ability to disappear without guilt. Their capacity to say no. This is where psychological withdrawal becomes more than distance. Instead of demanding that another person carry a quality for you, you begin integrating that quality into yourself. You stop admiring boundaries from a distance and begin setting one. You stop envying someone's independence and begin tolerating your own solitude. You stop being fascinated by people who do not over-explain and begin explaining less yourself. The relationship changes. Sometimes it deepens because you finally meet the person as they are. Sometimes it ends because the projection was carrying most of the attachment. Both outcomes can be painful, but both are more conscious. And consciousness changes how you understand rejection. This is important because many people react excessively, not because disagreement itself is unbearable, but because rejection touches an older identity wound. A simple no feels like, someone's distance feels like, a boundary feels like. But those meanings are not contained in the event itself. They are supplied by the complex. Once you begin recognizing that, rejection starts to become psychologically separable from worth. Someone can reject your request. Someone can misunderstand you. This sounds simple intellectually. Emotionally, it can take years to embody. Because the old nervous system continues scanning for evidence. Should I send another message? This is where a different practice becomes useful. When you feel the urge to react immediately, create a small interval. Not because silence is always superior, because reaction becomes easier to evaluate after the emotional charge drops. Ask yourself, if I respond now, what am I trying to achieve? Or relief from my own anxiety? Those are very different motives. If the goal is relief, you may not be communicating. You may be regulating yourself through the other person, and that creates dependence. You need them to answer in order to feel calm. You need them to forgive in order to feel okay. You need them to understand in order to trust yourself. You need them to choose you in order to feel worthy. That means your emotional stability is outsourced. This is the deeper form of availability the reference script points toward. Not just being physically available, psychologically available to every shift in someone else's mood. A person can be alone in a room and still be completely occupied by someone else. That is why physical distance alone does not create freedom. You can block someone and think about them all day. You can stop messaging them and spend hours checking whether they viewed something. You can disappear while secretly waiting for them to notice. You can leave a relationship and keep having it internally. True withdrawal begins when your attention is no longer organized around the other person's response. As this becomes conscious, the work shifts from merely resisting a reaction to building a different relationship with yourself. One in which connection no longer requires self-abandonment. What am I saying yes to only because I fear what happens if I say no? Who am I protecting from discomfort? And why has their discomfort always mattered more than mine? These are not selfish questions. They are differentiating questions. And without differentiation, connection becomes fusion. You do not relate to people. You merge with their expectations. Their mood becomes your mood. Their approval becomes your worth. Their disappointment becomes your guilt. Their absence becomes your collapse. It is loss of psychological boundaries. True intimacy requires two people, not one person disappearing into the other. And that is why becoming less available can actually make deeper connection possible. Because you stop offering a performance. You start bringing a person who can say yes, and leave a harmful dynamic, who can understand someone's pain without becoming responsible for curing it. That is a more mature form of love. It does not require self-erasure, and when you first begin practicing it, something powerful happens. You stop asking, "How do I keep everyone comfortable with me?" and start asking, "Can I remain myself even when someone is uncomfortable?" That is one of the thresholds of psychological adulthood, because there will always be someone disappointed by your limits, someone confused by your silence, someone who prefers your old role, someone who calls your boundaries selfish. The goal is not to become indifferent to feedback. The goal is to stop treating every negative reaction as proof that you must immediately return to who you were. And once you can do that, silence changes. It is no longer a weapon. Space between trigger and reaction. Space between expectation and decision. Space between another person's emotion and your own identity. And inside that space, you begin to hear something that may have been drowned out for years. But there is one final illusion we need to break before that voice can become trustworthy. Because some people stop reacting and immediately create a new persona around being unbothered. They become proud of being distant. And that can be just another defense. Real inner freedom is not needing everyone close, but it is also not needing everyone far away. The question is not. The question is, can you stay connected without abandoning yourself? That is where the deeper work begins. The danger of becoming unbothered is that it can look like freedom while still being organized around fear. But only because you want the other person to panic. But only because you are afraid that if you stay emotionally open, you will be hurt. But underneath it is disappointment. But underneath it is avoidance. But underneath it is the fear of needing anyone again. This is why psychological withdrawal has to be examined carefully. Because the ego can take even healing language and turn it into another mask. I protect my peace. I don't chase. I cut people off. I don't explain myself. Sometimes these statements reflect healthy boundaries. Sometimes they are defenses against vulnerability. The difference lies in what happens underneath, or secretly waiting for someone to notice. This distinction matters because real individuation does not make you less human. It makes you more capable of being human without losing yourself. You can still care deeply, still feel disappointed, but the feeling no longer automatically decides the behavior. That is emotional maturity. The ability to feel without immediately reacting. The ability to care without collapsing. The ability to stay open without becoming available for everything. The ability to walk away without needing to turn the other person into a villain. That last part is important, because one of the easiest ways to justify withdrawal is to demonize the person we are withdrawing from. They were toxic. They never cared. They only used me. Sometimes that is accurate. But sometimes the relationship was simply built around a role that no longer works. And when that happens, the mind prefers a clean story. That story protects self-image. But it can also prevent deeper learning. Because the uncomfortable question remains, why was I available for the role? Why did I ignore the early signs? Why did I keep giving when resentment had already appeared? That inner separation is tested most clearly when a boundary disappoints someone. A boundary that exists only when everyone approves of it is not yet an inner boundary. I knew setting boundaries would make everything worse. But sometimes what you are seeing is simply the system testing whether the old button still works. This is why consistency matters. If you set a boundary only when the other person accepts it peacefully, it is not yet a boundary. It is a request for permission. A real boundary has to survive someone else's disappointment. Again, not every boundary is correct. You can set unreasonable boundaries. You can use boundaries to escape accountability. That is why self-examination remains necessary. Ask, is this boundary protecting my integrity or protecting me from discomfort I actually need to face? For example, refusing to participate in verbal abuse is a boundary. Refusing every difficult conversation because conflict makes you anxious may be avoidance. Not replying immediately because you need time to regulate can be healthy. Ignoring someone for days to punish them is manipulation. Taking space to think can be mature. Using silence to force someone to chase you is control. The behavior can look similar from the outside. The psychological intention is different. And individuation requires honesty about intention. Not, how powerful does this make me look? But, what is actually moving me? You do not need a perfect answer. You need a more honest one. Because the shadow often enters through noble language. I am protecting myself. Or maybe you are punishing. I am choosing peace. Or maybe you are avoiding intimacy. I am done explaining myself. Or maybe you are refusing to take responsibility. This does not make boundaries wrong. It makes consciousness necessary. The goal is not to become suspicious of every decision. The goal is to stay curious about your own motives. That curiosity keeps power from becoming another persona. And this becomes especially important once people begin responding differently to you. Some may respect you more. If you begin needing respect as proof that your boundaries are working, you create another dependency. The deeper purpose of a boundary is not to manipulate someone into respecting you. It is to define what you will participate in. Your decision cannot depend entirely on the reaction. This is where people confuse external outcomes with internal alignment. The other person becomes angry. Someone interprets it negatively. Sometimes a conscious choice produces an uncomfortable consequence. Maturity means tolerating that. Because the alternative is to organize your life entirely around avoiding negative reactions. And that means returning to the old prison. You will always be able to find someone who dislikes your boundary. Someone who thinks you are too distant. If identity depends on universal approval, you have no stable identity. You have a voting system. And everyone gets a ballot. This is why individuation can feel lonely. You begin removing votes, not because other people do not matter, because they cannot all have equal authority over who you become. At some point, you need an inner center, a place from which decisions are evaluated not only through reaction, but through values. Does this align with who I am trying to become? Does this preserve dignity? Does this create more integrity? Am I abandoning someone else unnecessarily? Those questions are more useful than, and as that inner center strengthens, the need to react weakens. The deeper purpose is not to become cold, unreachable, or morally superior. It is to become honest enough to see both the other person's behavior and your own participation in the pattern. Someone can love you and still be incapable of meeting you well. Someone can have beautiful qualities and still participate in a destructive pattern with you. That does not make your care fake, and eventually, this understanding has to become embodied. You have to practice staying present through the discomfort that once forced you to explain, chase, rescue, attack, or surrender. This is how emotional capacity expands, not through avoiding discomfort, through discovering that discomfort can be survived without automatic self-abandonment. And eventually, the nervous system begins learning something new. Silence does not always mean abandonment. Conflict does not always mean the end of love. Someone's disappointment does not mean you are bad. A delayed reply does not define your value. A boundary does not make you cruel. Being misunderstood does not erase who you are. And when those associations begin weakening, your reactions naturally change. You do not have to force yourself to appear detached. You become less compelled. And other people may notice. But their reaction is no longer the measure of success, because if you watch constantly to see whether people respect you more, miss you more, or chase you more, you have returned to external validation. The purpose of becoming less reactive is not to become more desirable. It is not to make anyone afraid of losing you. It is not to create scarcity around your presence. It is to restore choice. Maybe someone does notice your absence. Maybe they respect your boundary. Maybe a relationship improves. The transformation is internal. You stop making decisions solely to control the outcome. That is freedom. And ironically, this can make your relationships more honest. Because when you stop trying to guarantee that everyone stays, you can finally discover who stays without being managed. When you stop overgiving, you discover whether reciprocity exists. When you stop filling every silence, you discover whether the other person reaches toward you. When you stop hiding disagreement, you discover whether the relationship can survive reality. When you stop pretending to be endlessly easy, you discover whether someone actually knows you, or only knows the role you performed for them. That can be painful information, but it is valuable. Because a relationship that can only survive your self-abandonment is already asking too much. And a relationship that becomes stronger when you become more honest is revealing something very different. This is why boundaries do not necessarily destroy intimacy. Healthy boundaries can make intimacy possible. Without boundaries, you do not know whether someone loves you or simply benefits from your inability to say no. Without differentiation, you do not know where one person ends and the other begins. Without honesty, closeness becomes performance. But when two people can say, "This is what I need. This is what I cannot give. This hurt me. I disagree. I need space. I want closeness. I was wrong." Then something more real becomes possible. Not perfect harmony, relationship, two separate people choosing connection. And that is very different from two people unconsciously using each other to regulate old wounds. This brings us to one of the most practical changes you can make. Before responding to an emotionally charged situation, ask yourself 3 questions. What am I feeling? Not what should you feel. What is actually there? Anger, fear, shame, guilt, jealousy, abandonment? Then, what am I afraid will happen if I do not react immediately? This question exposes the complex. And finally, what response will I respect tomorrow? Not what will make the anxiety disappear fastest. What response will still make sense when the emotional charge has passed? Those 3 questions can create enough space to interrupt an entire pattern. And if you want to go deeper, begin tracking your reactions for 1 week. Do not track every emotion. Track moments of compulsion. Moments when you feel, I have to answer. I have to explain. I have to fix this. I have to know. I have to make them understand. I have to make sure they are not upset. Those phrases are clues. Compulsion often reveals where freedom is weakest. Then look for repetition. Which situations keep producing the same urge? Which people? Which emotional themes? Rejection? Authority? Abandonment? Criticism? Disapproval? The pattern becomes visible. And once it is visible, choose 1 interruption. Only 1. If you normally respond immediately, wait. If you normally explain for 10 minutes, explain once. If you normally say yes automatically, say, let me think about it. That sentence alone can transform a people-pleasing pattern. Let me think about it. You have created space. No immediate yes. No immediate no. Space. If you normally chase someone who withdraws, do not chase once. Then observe yourself. Do not focus on them. Focus on what happens inside you. What story appears? They're leaving. They don't care. I need to fix this. There is the unconscious pattern. Now you can work with it. This is important because the true measure of progress is not whether you never feel triggered again. You will. The measure is how quickly you recognize what is happening. At first, you realize 3 days later. I did it again. Then 3 hours later. Then 30 minutes. Then while you are doing it. And eventually, before. That is growth. The space between trigger and awareness becomes smaller. The space between awareness and choice becomes larger. Until one day something happens that would once have consumed you. Someone says something provocative. You feel the reaction rise. The old argument appears in your mind. And then, you let it pass. No performance, no suppression, no dramatic victory. You simply do not give the impulse your entire identity. And maybe nobody notices. That is okay. Because the most important changes in your life will not always be visible from the outside. No one applauds the message you decided not to send. No one sees the boundary you kept despite the guilt. No one knows you almost returned to the old pattern and chose differently. No one sees the 5 minutes you sat with anxiety instead of reaching for reassurance. But those invisible moments change the architecture of your psyche. They teach you, I can survive this feeling without betraying myself. And each time that happens, self-trust grows. Not confidence based on believing you will always make the right choice. Self-trust based on knowing you can remain present with yourself when life becomes uncomfortable. That may be one of the deepest forms of confidence there is. Because eventually, you stop needing to predict everything. You trust yourself to respond. Someone may leave. You will grieve. Someone may misunderstand you. You will survive. A relationship may end. You will rebuild. You may make a mistake. You will confront it. You no longer need complete control over the future in order to feel safe. That changes how you love. You can love without gripping, give without bargaining, stay without imprisoning, leave without destroying. And perhaps most importantly, you can let other people be who they are. You stop trying to force them into the role you need. If they are inconsistent, you see inconsistency. You do not spend years translating it into hidden love. If they do not want what you want, you hear it. You do not turn their rejection into a project. If they cannot meet you deeply, you stop trying to educate them into compatibility. You observe, then choose. That is one of the quiet powers of becoming less reactive. Reality becomes easier to see when you stop constantly negotiating with it. And sometimes reality will disappoint you. But disappointment is often less destructive than years of illusion. This is why the goal is not emotional invulnerability. It is contact with reality, without abandoning yourself. That is individuation, not becoming separate from humanity. Becoming sufficiently differentiated that connection becomes a choice rather than a survival strategy. And perhaps this is the deepest thing that happens when you stop reacting to everyone. You discover that many of the reactions you thought were expressions of love were actually expressions of fear. Fear of losing. Fear of rejection. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of being alone. And once you can see the fear, you can begin separating it from love. Love does not require you to answer every message immediately. Love does not require you to rescue everyone. Love does not require you to surrender every boundary. Love does not require endless explanations. Love does not require self-erasure. Sometimes love speaks. Sometimes love listens. Sometimes love stays. Sometimes love leaves. But conscious love does not require you to disappear from yourself. And if there is one thing I want you to remember after this video, let it be this. Your peace does not begin when everyone finally learns how to treat you. It begins when your inner world is no longer automatically governed by every person's reaction to you. That does not happen overnight. It happens one pause at a time, one boundary, one uncomfortable silence, one moment where you feel the old compulsion and choose not to obey it. If you have recognized yourself somewhere in this journey, write one sentence in the comments. I choose my response. Not I don't care. Not I need nobody. Something stronger. I choose my response. Because that is the point. Not numbness. Choice. And if you want to continue exploring the hidden patterns that shape your relationships, your identity, and the decisions you make without realizing it, subscribe to The Kingdom Within. There is much more inside you than the version of yourself you have learned to present to the world. And the deeper you look, the more you begin to understand something Jung spent his life exploring. The forces that control us most powerfully are often the ones we have not yet learned to see. So the next time someone provokes you, pause. The next time silence makes you anxious, pause. The next time guilt tells you to abandon your boundary, pause. The next time you feel compelled to explain yourself to someone determined to misunderstand you, pause. Not forever, just long enough to ask, what is actually moving me right now? That question may reveal more than the argument ever could. Because the person standing in front of you is only part of what is happening. The other part is inside. An old fear, an old role, an old wound, an old persona, a shadow asking to be integrated. And every time you recognize one of those forces before automatically obeying it, something changes. You reclaim a little attention, a little energy, a little choice. Until eventually you realize that the greatest change was never that people began treating you differently. It was that their behavior stopped having unlimited access to the center of your inner world. You can still care. You can still love. You can still be generous. But now your kindness contains boundaries. Your empathy includes yourself. Your silence does not need to punish. Your presence does not need to be earned through exhaustion. And your absence does not need to prove anything. You are simply becoming more conscious of where you end and where everyone else begins. And from that place, something becomes possible that constant reaction could never give you. A relationship with others that does not require the loss of yourself. That is not indifference. That is not coldness. That is psychological freedom. And perhaps the day you stop reacting to everyone is the day you finally begin responding to your own life. End.